So, Peter, during your time as CEO, we've had an inquiry into child sexual abuse. So, would you like to tell us some of your reflections on that?
Yes. So back in 2014, the Prime Minister was David Cameron, who actually visited the NSPCC in my first month here. And I used to work with him back in the day. We should talk about that sometime. But Theresa May was the Home Secretary, and she made two announcements on the back of some child sexual abuse scandals from the past. One was an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, and the other was an inquiry into whether the Home Office had instigated a cover-up of records back in the 70s and 80s to hide organised sexual abuse in Whitehall. And I was appointed alongside a QC, Richard Whittam, to chair the second of those inquiries. So if you Google the Wanless review, there's loads of stuff about Derek Wanless, who did a massive review of the NHS for Gordon Brown. But there's another Wanless and Whittam review which looked into what the Home Office knew or didn't know about sexual abuse back in the 70s. And we were given like 3 months, I think, to conduct and complete that review and then give our evidence to Parliament and all of that. But alongside that was this gargantuan independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which was going to take evidence under oath and ran for 7 years and cost £250 million and took evidence from over 7,000 victims and survivors. Extremely thorough scrutiny into all sorts of aspects and incidents of institutional child sexual abuse. NSPCC gave evidence to many of the strands of the inquiry, including a strand on leadership, of what does good leadership of child prevention of child sexual abuse look like in an institution, which I was invited to give evidence to, which was a great privilege. But my goodness, there's nothing that concentrates the mind quite like giving evidence under oath about how you're leading an organisation to keep children safe. So, you know, that was good for me and good for us, and required us to get our story very straight. And you can go and read our evidence in the archive on that strand and many others. After 7 years, the inquiry reported, and it came up with around 20 significant recommendations in conclusion to add to what they had discovered previously. It came out on the day that Liz Truss resigned as Prime Minister and sunk without a trace. And that was devastatingly disappointing. Alexis Jay, who chaired the inquiry, had an event shortly afterwards with institutions and organisations that were passionate about the issues behind her inquiry, because the inquiry came to an end and that's it. There's no sort of having said what you think needs to be done, this is how it happens. It's sent to government, and if government ignores it, government ignores it. So there was quite a lot of anger and disappointment in the room at this event, and everyone was looking at everyone else. And I thought, well, if not the NSPCC, then who to take this forward somehow or other? And if not now, then when? So out of that meeting, we created what we've called the ICSA Change Makers, which are over 60 institutions that we don't agree on anything and everything, but what we do agree on is that that the statutory arrangements for preventing child sexual abuse are inadequate and need a significant step change, that the quality and effectiveness and consistency of safeguarding is not what it should be, and all of us can do something about that. And the voices of victims and survivors themselves should be central to this debate, and we owe it to the 7,000 plus who had the bravery to speak up in that inquiry to do something about all of this. In due course, the previous government produced a response wholly inadequate if you're charitable, you would say that maybe, well, somewhere between 1 and 4 of the 20 recommendations have had some sort of a response. We've been worried that a government might pick 1 or 2 of the recommendations and drive them forward without thinking about the consequences of the other recommendations. So this needs system change, and the NSPCC has a real, I think, responsibility and respect among this community to ensure that we keep the flame alive, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, and we work well with victims and survivors who have a particular, perspective and contribution to make to this debate. 2 more really memorable days for me in my time at the NSPCC. One was when Theresa May announced there was going to be an inquiry. There was a major focus on victims of abuse from 20, 30, 40 years ago. Rightly, they hadn't had justice, they hadn't had the attention that they deserve. But we knew, and we were working with children, young people who were being sexually abused now, or who had been sexually abused. This is not a problem of the past, it's a problem of today as well. And so we invited her to Weston House, where she met with a group of children who all had lived experience of sexual abuse. It was an extraordinary occasion which needed very, very careful, expert, trauma-informed management by our amazing social workers. And I know that's remained with Theresa May forever, because she talks about it even now. And I went home that night and got on the wrong train. My head was full of this stuff, and suddenly, where am I? And so that was an extraordinary day. And then just recently, on the 2-year anniversary of the inquiry being published, we held an event where we heard from 15 people with lived experience of child sexual abuse. They were the only people that spoke on the day, the ICSA change makers. We were present, and some of us were offering support to the speakers, but we had in the back of the room the senior civil servants from all the government departments that have responsibilities that are relevant to achieving the step change in the system of support for victims of child sexual abuse, which we know is required. And whilst there's a pile of kind of evidence and insight in the work of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse and work that the NSPCC has done in the past, there's nothing quite like contextualising the nature of the changes that are being recommended with testimony from people who can vocalise the impact that child sexual abuse has had on them, not just in the moments that it happened, but subsequently in their life, for the civil servants to reflect on the scale and nature of what might otherwise be, an intellectual academic exercise looking at, the extraordinary kind of numbers and nature of what's gone on in the past. So that, again, was a really memorable occasion, and I think it has the power to take the next iteration of debate with the new government to somewhere beyond us simply saying, here is this weighty tome, what are you going to do about it? Here we have refreshed and illustrated for you why this is so important. And these 15 people, we say, oh, you're so brave, or oh, we, pity you for what's happened. They don't want our pity. They want to see the change, which is so desperately needed. So everything's changed and nothing has changed when it comes to child sexual abuse in my period at the NSPCC.